European countries buy billions of dollars worth of US military equipment that can be then transferred to Ukraine. How are Europeans reacting? Let's go across to Thomas Sparrow, correspondent with our partner DW in Berlin. Hi, Thomas. How was Trump's plan received in Europe?
It was a mixed reaction. You heard already from Kaja Kallas stressing on the one hand that it was important, on the other hand that Europeans would like Donald Trump to share the burden. And what that essentially means is that they would like Donald Trump and Donald Trump's administration not only to provide the weapons and the heavy military systems, but also to share the burden financially. But under the current agreement, that doesn't seem to be the case. However, several European governments did welcome the news, saying it was a step forward, it was a step in the right direction towards Europeans and Americans working together when it comes to supporting Ukraine. In other words, a move away from Donald Trump's previous perceived ambivalence. So in a way, you see that it's seen as an initial step forward, but there are also some complaints, there's some criticism and some reluctance also from European leaders when it comes to this new proposal.
Indeed. Thomas, this comes as European countries, including France and Germany, have major plans in place to boost defense spending. Can you give us more details on these plans?
It's not only France and Germany. In fact, NATO leaders agreed to increase their defense spending up to 5% of GDP, including defense infrastructure as well. And then different countries are obviously putting in place their way forward when it comes to coming to terms with this new 5% of GDP when it comes to their defense spending. In the specific case of France, President Emmanuel Macron recently announced a new defense spending for the next 2 years. And in the case of Germany, this has been a very significant shift in recent months because now defense spending has been exempted from debt limits, from the so-called debt rule here in Germany, which basically provides the government with sufficient funding to increase defense spending. In Germany, there has been, on the one hand, support to that, stressing that Germany needs to obviously be in a capacity to defend itself given international challenges. On the other hand, there's also criticism by those who, on the one hand, are wary of public spending, of public debt. On the other hand, those who believe that that's not the way forward, that public money should be instead used to spend more on infrastructure, on education, on health and similar topics. So there's also a debate going on here in Germany about what essentially this new defense spending means and what impact it will have in the medium to long term.
Okay, we'll know that in a while, in few days from now. But Thomas, the question here is, are European citizens on board with this massive defense spending?
In general, you can sense here in Europe that there's support when it comes to basically defending Europe from some of the threats. But there are differences both within countries and within different parts of the European Union. So the closer European countries are to Russia and to a Russian border, so for example in Eastern Europe or in Northern Europe, the more interest there is to spend more on defense and to be better protected. On the other hand, in maybe the Mediterranean or in Southern Europe, that doesn't seem to be the case. And that also explains why, when it comes to this 5% of GDP, Spain was one of the countries that was most reluctant. However, within countries, there's also a differing perception. Here in Germany, 50% stressed, according to a recent survey, that they supported that 5% GDP when it comes to NATO spending, but nearly a third were actually against, saying it was too much. So you can sense here again that there's a big discussion on the topic.
All right, Thomas, thank you so much for joining in. We leave it there.